we'll start as per requested with Hylaeus, and we'll look at it maybe both in Discover Life and also using the genera cheat sheet. And if anyone can give us feedback in terms of whether the video feed is choppy or not today, that would be good. I think we're okay. Let's jump to the genera memorization thing. So Hylaeus sits in Andrenidae. The females, oh, look at that giant plus. The females here, we're going to highlight this line here, have, so the females are a little different. Hylaeus carries their pollen and nectar internally in some kind of crop-like organ. So they're not like almost all the other bees carrying their pollen and sometimes the nectar, sometimes not, depending on the species, externally on their legs or some underneath their abdomen, like in the Megachilidae. So they have a very wasp shape and form to them. We'll see a couple different examples here under the microscope. But be aware that when you're doing your initial surveys for bees, sometimes people, particularly if you have technicians and things too, aren't aware of this, push the Hylaeus to one side as a not a bee. So because of this problem and a couple other groups, particularly the parasitic bees, also don't look particularly bee-like in the traditional way, we tell our folks, often volunteers, sometimes technicians, to pin up or glue to the pin, because we do a lot of pin gluing, anything that is a bee or a wasp. And they can work with us if they have some incredible amount of Taphiid wasps and they feel like these are all wasps, why should I do this? We might still pin up some subset of those because we usually send those out to other folks, particularly Matt Buck up in Alberta. But that allows you to, in your pinning process, to hopefully diminish the probability that you have skipped over a Hylaeus or some of these other groups that might look more like a wasp, which they really are, and not the traditional bee. So if we're looking at the cheat sheet here, what we'll see is for the females, sort of the string here. If I click in there, we'll see it up at the top. So 2 submarginal cells, we'll cover a lot of this stuff. No scopa. So scopa is the generic term for pollen-carrying hairs because, again, they are carrying their pollen and nectar internally, so they look like little wasps, very skinny in relationship to the others, and relatively unhairy. So this gets into how do I tell it from a wasp kinds of things. And you'll see that there's a look and feel to the group that's pretty distinctive that will help you out a lot. So most of the time, there's no, once you learn the general look and feel, you don't have to look up these kinds of things to determine. But again, we're assuming you're beginners. So another feature is the jugal lobe of the hind wing. Remember, the hind wing has these lobes at the bottom towards the interior part of the wing. The jugal lobe is about 3/4 as long as the vernal lobe. Often that is tricky to see. We'll see if we can see that in a couple cases. So that helps narrow things down in a dichotomous or within our matrix guides. And then the females, which we're talking about now, have narrow slots or fovea that are running up along the compound eye from about the antennal base about to the level of the, I think that should be medial ocellus. Let's see if I can wend my way there. And when we get to, yeah, medial ocelli. So when we get to eventually looking at individual species identification, that becomes important. What's going on at the very end up towards the upper part of the head of that fovea, whether it leaves the base of the, leaves the curve of the compound eye and how far up it goes. So let's take a look right now at a specimen, and then we will play around with Discover Life if I get to the right place. So I have preloaded this. We'll back off so we can see the fovea because those are the hardest to locate. We will back off so you get some general looks and feels of Hylaeus. In general, there's always exceptions. In general, the females have yellow masks. That's why they're called the mask bee here in the paraocular area. So this is the Clypeus. In this particular species, if we focus down that direction, we'll see that annulatus, which is has some yellow at the very end of the Clypeus. Other species have none. Those are characters used to the presence and the pattern within these markings, and the males and females are used a fair amount when helping determine species. There's an expectation that one of Corey Sheffield's graduate students is going to clutter up the Hylaeus space with more species. And that's both good and bad because it means we're talking even more subtle characteristics coming up. So let's point out this fovea. So if you recall from Andrena fovea were almost always quite wide, and there were little tiny hairs lining the base of it. And so it often created this plane of reflective surface. That is not the case with Hylaeus fovea. It's a slot. So here's the slot here. If we follow that, you can't quite see it because the antenna, let's see, I don't know that we can really pick it up well on the opposite side. A little bit. You can see it running here along, and then it pulls away, in this case, a little bit. And where it ends up in terms of relationship to how high up the middle ocellus is often useful in talking about some species cutoffs into different groups. So that's the fovea. Let's back off here in terms of magnification. And you can see these specimens often curl up. We've got this glued to a pin, but you can see it's presenting as very wasp-like. I'm going to turn this particular specimen onto its back and pull it over. Really, with really no exceptions that I can think of, in North America, this is what Hylaeus looks like. A basically black bee with different amounts of yellow markings. Tegula often has markings. Pronotal collar has markings that help differentiate it. The legs, particularly the tips of the tibia, have yellow markings. Their presence, absence, or lengths are helping distinguish the species. You can see here on the wing, you have the marginal cell here on the margin, and then below it, the sub-marginal cells, only 2 in this case, and a relatively unbent, but gosh, this is the problem with that character in the main guides. You could imagine, let me focus in here a little bit, yourself into thinking that is radically bent at the end, but it's relatively smooth. It doesn't do a sharp, almost right angle curve. Let's jump now to discover life, because we didn't do that last time, to let's see, I think, there it is. To use the guide so you get used to that, because at the species level in particular, you're going to need to use the guide a lot. We do encourage you to, again, begin this memorization look and feel process at the genus level, but at the species level, particularly at the beginning, lots of guide use. So we'll click on the bumblebee, click here to jump to BID. You can hot link this using that string at the top on your computer, because every day you'll be looking at these. There are enough Hylaeus that we've split the guide into a female guide and a male guide when you're doing species, but we're going to go to the genus level and see what happens. All right, here we are again, 162 kinds in North America of genera of bees. We're going to we can do these larger categories up here at the top, but This one, I believe, came from Maryland. Well, I know the range would be include Maryland. So we'll say it's from Maryland. That drops things down to 55 of different kinds. I'm interacting a lot with the search terms. Like if I want, I could click it off and click on a new one. I could click multiple states if I felt like it was on the border or there was some ambiguity. Skipping the shortcuts because we're going to pretend that we don't know what family it's from. We don't know what family it's from. That's a note about sex. We're going to say, oh, it's not shiny race car green or a reflective metallic blue. That takes care of a few things. The thorax surface, whether it has markings or not, it does have a few. So the it has a little bit of, in this case, that particular specimen, some yellow on the tegula. There are a couple of Hylaeus. So if we click none, a couple of Hylaeus species have no markings on there, and they should still show up. And you could correctly ID it with the none case. But in this case, and that's how these guides work, we can score them for both cases, because the species sometimes have some of these characters and sometimes not. So in this case, because some Hylaeus have a completely dark thorax and abdomen with no markings, Hylaeus basilis in particular, basilis, is a good example. But ours has yellow, as do most of them. The axilla shape is not pointing out. That doesn't help us much. We were discussing the basal vein. We decided that it was gentle and uniformly arched, not strongly arched at the bottom. Really, that didn't make any difference because we've already gone down a path that where this character doesn't help us. Now we have the jugal to vanal lobe ratio, at least 3/4 as long, and we let's see if I can see that in the microscope, because again, the jugal and the vanal lobe thing is tricky, and I think this is a lousy specimen, so I'm going to get a different one here from my annulatus pile and see if I find one with wings sticking out. And this appears to be the case. And let's see if we can find, let me take down the power and the scarred surface of our microscope plate is visible. Okay, so there's another Hylaeus. Again, they all look about the same. We're going to zoom in and see if we can find, okay, so we're now looking at here. I'm going to zoom in some more. The hind wing, it's very nice. The forewing is to the bottom of the screen, out of view at this point. Venation is very different. All right, so although our jugal to vanal thing, so here, maybe I get these things mixed up, but I believe, I'm pretty sure this is the jugal lobe here. This is a little bit corrupted specimen. And sadly, I believe the vanal is down here, which is difficult to see. So let me see if I flip this specimen over, whether we get a shot of that ratio there. Got some reflection on the surface, so let me just drop that down. And okay, yes, much better. And I was wrong about the other one. This bottom lobe, again, I'm in my mind, since I never use this, I'm mixing them up. Here's one lobe, here's the other lobe. This is the jugal lobe, right? The ventral lobe is the outer one. The jugal lobe is about 3/4 as long. So here's the length here, about 3/4 as long as the ventral. And so we will validate that here, and we'll click that one. And in our cheat sheet, we saw that that was a relatively important thing. So now we're down to 5. So at this point, usually in my work, I'm not going to even bother with the remainder of these. Although I've just scrolled down and said, oh, well, this is a small b. That's, roughly, and small or large are good in terms of ID string. So I'm going to say 7 millimeters. And look, it got rid of another 2 that were obviously big B's. So I'm going to click now simplify. So I've created a new guide that essentially is going to tell the difference between these 4 genera, and it pulls in any identification couplets, or if you want really characters that help separate them out. And in this case, and some may be inappropriate, like length of male bee. We don't have a male, we have a female, so we're skipping that. These are the taxonomic things which we decided we don't understand because we're not insider taxonomists. Female leg pollen carrying hairs location, no scopa, right? So we said before it carries it internally, so there are no scopa present. So now we're down to 2. When you're in these circumstances, it's almost always well worthwhile to hit simplify. So a new guide is basically a guide telling these 2 apart. So Nomada is a parasitic bee, so it looks like it because it is a female with no scopa. Also, but for different reasons. It does no need to carry pollen because it's laying its eggs in other species, mostly Andrena. So now, if we just do a scan through, we might see some things that we either see or we are, like, this is part of using these guys. You develop your own patterns, like, oh, I like these things. Like, for example, we just covered this head, facial, female head, face, fovea, present. Yes, and boom, it should be just Hylaeus. But there's often and usually more than one way. Like here's a hind leg basitibial plate, presence or absence. I have no idea. I'm not even going to bother to look, but let's just say it's absent. And it is also Hylaeus. If we do present, it should be Nomada. So there are, multiple. It's a short tongue bee, I believe. And there's Hylaeus, and looks like there's multiple ways to tell those 2 apart. So it's bifid tongue. Again, I'm not going to show that. It's almost, a lot of times it's difficult to see these particular things. We even have a Hylaeus versus selected other genera thing here. I'm unclicked things, so now we're back to this. So we have jugal 3/4 as long as vernal, and others, jugal lobe, less than 1/4 as long as vernal, although for some reason that should have in the past character eliminated Nomada. So I'm not sure why. It could be that we did not score Nomada for the previous character, but did do it here. So we have male characters here, which we're not dealing with. Okay, so that's a trip through the female Hylaeus landscape. I'm going to pull a male now, and we'll do the same.
Any questions before moving on?
Find a male. Male.
Roxanne, unmute.
Who's on mute?
I just had an observation. I got down to Hylaeus and Ropalolemma. Once I ticked the length of the jugal vein, that got rid of the Ropalolemma. So maybe that's why.
That could be if you were Hylaeus versus Rhopalolema, which I'm not even sure. That must be a Western genus. So my guess is that geographically, you chose a different region of the continent to run through that, which would be appropriate because Hylaeus occur throughout the continent. But so I can't speak to those two, the differences in those two genera, because frankly, I don't even know how to pronounce the other one.
I didn't choose a location because I have one of your boxes and I went, well, I'm not going to look it up. I want to see if I can get it right.
Yeah, and that's again, when you have specimens and you're starting out, doing things like not including the geographic area helps you walk through the characters and begin to learn sort of the topography of the identification space, let's see, because you'll be introduced to genera that would be normally just eliminated by geography alone. Trying to find a male now.
Randall asked, and I think we had this question a couple weeks ago, but maybe not everybody. We should talk about it again. Is there a known function for the fovea in this group or in Andrena?
I have no idea.
So I'm offering again to the group, if you know, if there's some papers, send them along. If you have a grad student who wants to study that, send them along.
All right, for some reason, I'm having a difficult time finding males in these groups. Maybe I'm not. Oh, there we go. All right. So when comparing male and female Hylaeus, the general pattern is going to be similar in vibe in that they're dark, but the male counterpart will have, I think always have more yellow in their face. So you can see here, I'm not sure what species this is. What is this? Schwartzii. So it's a bigger one, which is good. In fact, we're getting a lot of, why don't we do automatic white balance? That might be better. But I don't know if I can change the amount of light coming in there. Maybe, oh, we do the card trick again. But this happens a lot in terms of the what we're looking at, and you can see now some better topography there, is that almost all the Clypeus and the supraclypeus and the paraocular areas, the areas that you're seeing now, become completely yellow. And the focus on male identification at the species level becomes these upper edges, which amounts to how far do they extend, what do they do around the socket, and those become important characteristics. Other important characteristics would be the color of the mandibles, the color of the labrum, extent of yellow in legs. That's at the species level, so we're not going to worry about those kinds of things. But also part of the vibe here, not so much in this case, but in the males, a lot of species have what we might call inflated scapes. So the scape is the first antennal segment, and this one is moderately inflated, and we talk about inflation as the width compared to the flagellar or pedicel segments. And you can see it's bigger, but not hugely so. In some species, it can be twice as big as the flagellar segments. And often there's differing amounts. This is a very dark species in terms of coloration. And there's differing amounts of yellow on that scape to help with ID. So if we jump now back, but no facial fovea, or if there are, there's some residual tiny bit, but it's not a thing in the males. So if we jump back to the memorization chart area and we go to the males here, and we jump to the ID string here. So we see two submarginals again, basal vein not strongly arched, ditto. The jugal lobe hind wing 3/4 as long as the vanal lobe. So all those are going to be similar as in the females. Yellow markings on face. Now, I'm not 100% sure, but since it's mentioned here, it may be that and I think that's true. I think even the very notoriously dark species, Hylaeus basilis, and there's some Western ones that are similar dark, have yellow on the face in the males. Labrum broader than long, and
For labrum broader than long on male Hylaeus, which dimension is counted as broad and which dimension is counted as long?
good point. So broad would be width of the face, and long, so that would be as we've gone along, we've used more latitude and longitude kinds of talking. So the latitudinal a part of the labrum is broader than the longitudinal part. But our reference is usually the midline of the specimen when we're talking about latitudes and longitudes or broader and longer. But yeah, agree. Sometimes it's murky. Okay. So again, pointing out though a problem, which is if the mandibles are closed, which they almost always are in Hylaeus, how do you know whether it's broader than long? Sometimes you can see things peeking out if it's long, in other words, longer than broad, below the mandibles. But if it's broader than long, then it's kind of ambiguous because you can't see it. And then there's one subattanal suture rather than two. We'll go back and see if we can see that in that specimen we just looked at. And there's no colored markings on the abdomen. So it lacks light colored markings. A few species have parts of the abdomen that have a strong to very strong reddish hue to them, but not in the, so I guess I should modify that because those are obviously colored, but as a marking, I should be clear. We're talking about dots, spots, stripes, and that kind of thing. And additionally, it's also similar to the female, nearly hairless because of the general. So the males often are a weak reflection of the female characteristics. So even though the males would never carry anything, in a lot of the species where that are pollen carrying externally, the males are also very hairy, even though theoretically they have no need for those hairs. So a lot of times the female characteristics show up in some way, particularly the physical ones, but a weakened way, I would call it, in the males. So in this case, they also remain nearly hairless. But in other species, why aren't the males hairless? Well, I'm not 100% sure, but there is some molecular cost for becoming radically different from the female, the important female archetype. Okay, so let's see if we can see, since we have it under the scope, the one subantennal suture. As we've seen from other kinds of factors here, a lot of times the subantennal sutures are tricky to see. I've just changed the magnification. Let me just run it all the way up and see if I can move this carefully into view. Okay, let's see if we can see it now. So I could be wrong, but I believe all species have one. I'm trying to bring down the lighting so that we have some scant lighting. So all species have that one that is defining the edges of the supraclypeus. Let's see if I can do two things at once. So here's the one, and actually, so it should be and I'm guessing it is because this is so bright yellow, a suture line, the second suture line, if one were to exist, would come off the outer edge of the fossa or the hole in the head, to use technical terms here, of the bee, and there is no second subintendal suture there. So we have documented that pretty nicely, but most of the time, again, you will ultimately, with a little bit of work, just look at a bee like this and go, oh, that's Hylaeus. I see from the masked face alone and the body shape. But let's see if we can go through the guide, and then we'll spend maybe a wee bit of time looking at a Ceratina. So here we are. Yeah.
For a second, I just got an email saying that people who are logged in as guests are unable to access the chat. So I am going to try to troubleshoot that for our next meeting. But I wanted to give space here for questions. And you can always raise hand. I think that's still an option for you. But
okay.
Right now, if anybody needs to jump in with a question, here's an opportunity. Holly, go ahead.
No need. I was just testing the button. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for that.
All right. Should we
Go on.
jump? Okay. So now we're back in the genera guide. We just finished keying out to Hylaeus, so you can just click the restart button. And the left-hand side doesn't change, but the right-hand side has completely gone back to its original shape and form. If you hit search, though, you go back to the genera list again. So going through this, we'll say Maryland again, and we're skipping over the taxonomic categories, and we are seeing that we're going a little faster now. Dark, the thorax has markings. The axis shape is not poking out. Number of submarginals is 2, gently going, 3/4 is long. Let's just click search now. Oh, look, there we are. We're down to those 4 again. None of those were male characteristics. Let's just hit simplify. And now we're skipping over. Well, we could do lengths. Let's see. That one was, I'm just eyeballing 7. Well, I can already tell you, see the 4 there? So the 4 indicates that 4 taxonomic units, this case genera, are scored for having 7. So it should do nothing at all, right? Because they all have members within their genus that are at least 7 millimeters. Small, can have small bees. So not useful. Actually, it was a male anyway. So even if I did the right category of males, still you see the 4, not going to be useful. We don't know those taxonomic categories. This is a female character, not appropriate. Okay, male, head, antenna length. So this is a relative term, and it is again useful for very short things and very long antennae, and the rest not so much. So short, not unusually elongate, appearing similar to the antennae of the female of the species, not surpassing the posterior edge of the tegula. That is going to be the case here, but I can see from the 3 that it got rid of something, forget which thing, but so that was useful here. And subantennal sutures, well, we just talked about that, and we can see that it only has 1. And if we do that, we get down to Hylaeus. So we're already in that area. So that would take us through. We do have more options. So like if you can't see or you're uncomfortable with the subantennal sutures or it has no head, who knows what else is going on. You have more things, but this is female, this is a female character, mouth parts. So we unclick that. So we're at 3. If we looked at the tongue, again, Hylaeus has these bilobed, that's sort of a characteristic of the group, and it takes us back there. Oh, here's a wing character thing. You can see it has one is identified as as having the green one, and one is 2. So that's useful. Let's just take a quick look at the Hylaeus male wing and see, because that character is surprisingly useful at times, and see if we can determine. So I can put my finger behind it, and it looks pointed to me from here, but let's magnify this a bit more. So by putting my finger, I create a light background. But if you look here, there's the margin. This is the marginal cell. There's the tip. Unless I'm missing something, that looks pretty much right on the margin. So let's go back. You see, harder to see there, but if I put my finger under, it often adds as a contrast for wing characters. So pointed, this is directly from Michener's Guide to the Genera, and it gets complicated because you have these ors, but pointed it is, which is an irritating character. Back to Hylaeus again. So, and then here's a Hylaeus versus selected other genera. Once again, you have multiple instances where you could get to that answer. So, species level, different story, a lot of subtleties, more subtleties to come after the revision is finished. Let's take, in the remaining short period of time, unless there's questions about Hylaeus. Well, if there's questions about Hylaeus, let's maybe hear them now. Otherwise, we'll give you a sneak preview of Ceratina that will continue next time.
We have 2 things. For those who can't see the chat, this will go out in the email, but Jean Scarpula found us. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, Jean Scarpula.
Yeah.
Her Michener, 2007. Schubert and Schonitzder, 1993, have given an anatomical account of the facial fovea of various taxa, showing that the epidermis beneath the foveal cuticle consists of sensory cells, or secretory cells. Presumably, the fovea are evaporative surfaces, but the products and their functions are unknown. So that is information that we have now. We have 2 questions. I'm going to start with Selena has her hand raised, and then I have a question from the chat following that. So Selena, you can unmute.
Thank you. I have more general question, and you might have answered that before, just to make sure. If we don't, assuming we don't know whether our specimen is a male or a female, would you just skip the very sex-specific, I guess, questions, or would you still answer them just for the sake of answering them?
So yes to the first strategy, which is skipping over the sex-specific ones. But the nice thing about these kinds of guides is you can try out the characters. Click them, click search, and then see what happens. Might be informative. Then click them off again. However, usually you have usually you can figure out the sex based on counting the antennal segments or presence of genitalia poking out, or a sting poking out, or the counts of the tarsal segments. Not always, but I would say really high percentage of the time you should be able to nail the sex. But again, if you're starting out, that's a more difficult landscape to wander through. So you can use the guide without knowing the sex whatsoever. You would have to avoid committing, let's call it, to the male or female characters. a lot of times, so sometimes that works, and sometimes you have to know whether you have a male or female because the characters that are remaining are sex specific. But again, there's many paths through these guides. It's just a matter of which ones you click and how often you use the simplify button to create new guides. So, you know, it could work that way.
Okay, thank you.
And then we have a chat question. Is there a reason why Hylaeus have so little hair?
Yeah, they don't need it. So other species, when they move into a flower, they're trying to maximize their, let's call it, well, other species that are not parasites, they're trying to maximize their grab of pollen. So you can remember they don't really have fingers. So it's not like I'm gonna pluck all this pollen off and stick it on my legs. They are using their entire bodies covered in hairs usually as a way to pull off pollen off of a flower, and then they use their legs with various sort of grooming tools that are on those legs to move that pollen to a particular part of their body. So Hylaeus is basically just munching on the pollen, and it goes and is stored in a crop organ internally. So what's the point of hairs? It's like wasps don't really have, most cases, long hairs either because they're predators, and when they go to flowers, they're just there for a drink. And so hairs don't bring them anything useful.
Wait, so can you make the distinction between parasitic bees and Hylaeus?
Yeah, so Hylaeus is a pollen gathering bee. It's gathering pollen, i.e. it is working to directly for its young. So it's going out gathering pollen, although storing in its crop, and then regurgitates that back into the cell along with the nectar. Whereas a parasitic bee, it might go to flowers to gather nectar for itself, but it gathers no pollen whatsoever. What it's doing is it's looking for nests of whatever the appropriate host species are, laying the eggs in their nest, which have pollen and nectar in them. So they still require the pollen, but they are basically letting the host species do the pollen gathering. So they don't gather any pollen. So usually those species have reduced hairs too, because again, why do they need them? I'm trying to think if there's any parasitic bees that are particularly hairy, and I think that is not the case. Sometimes they use their hairs to create distinctive patterns that would either be of use hiding themselves, but probably more like sexual selection kinds of things. So the Epulus triepulus crowd and associates are do that all the time. Those hairs don't stick out where they might grab some pollen. They're oppressed, meaning they're prone or lying down on the surface, and they form often super beautiful patterns of contrasting whites, usually contrasting with the dark surface to act as like similar to like what colors would on others. So most of those bees too would have very few or reduced hairs.
I have a couple more questions.
Okay.
Are they, Hylaeus, more closely related to what we consider modern wasps than other bees?
I don't know that answer. Maybe someone else does.
Are the parasitic bumblebees hairy? I think we'll have a day on this, but worthwhile addressing.
Yeah, so I mentioned I'd have to go through and just look at them all and think about them, but in most cases, the answer is no. First of all, there are no cases that I can think of where the parasitic female has anything like pollen-carrying hairs. That's usually a way of helping determine whether you have a parasitic species. Like, oh, I've got a female, but I'm seeing no pollen-carrying hairs on this this lady at all. So in general, and maybe always, the answer is yes. There are few to no, well, never no, but few hairs on their bodies.
In Discover Life, Sam often uses the term create new guide as the outcome of pressing simplify rather than just pressing search. I'm not sure how to interpret that. Is it just the simplification brings up the hidden questions relevant to the search terms now entered? Or am I missing something important?
Yeah. So the difference is when you let's go to here we are on the B genera guide, right? So we went through it first and we came up with Hylaeus, but let's restart it. So this is how it would look when you first come in. Genera on the left, species on the right. And these up here are basically little shortcuts to just the questions that are on the first page. So you see there's only 15 questions on the first page, yet there's 162 different kinds of genera. So there's a bunch of questions that aren't showing up here. So when you hit search, you're interacting with the questions that are present on the current page and nothing else, right? So this is a maybe my terminology is loose. So this would be, we would call this the guide, and let's knock down the genera present to a much smaller group. Let's see, maybe we'll click. There's a collated group, and gosh, maybe I chose the wrong one. There's only 2 there now. Can we bring in something else? I think I overdid it. How about that one? No, that's not helpful. But, I can click that off now. And now I'll have, I think, 4 in there. Okay, so let's say now I've messed around on my front page. I'm down to 4 genera. Okay, so I can continue using this guide and using the search buttons, but only these questions are going to be relevant. And even if you answered every single one, you may still end up with these 4, let's say, but it could be a different set, obviously, depending on how you answered things. And then you'd be stuck, right? There's no way to differentiate those 4. So at that point, but really at any point, right? At any point you can hit simplify. And so when I hit simplify, now what's happening is these 4 genera are being used to query the genus guide, and it looks for any characters that were unanswered in the first round that are relevant in some way, and sometimes it's not even clear what that is, in some way in differentiating those 4 apart. And it goes to the hidden characters, those characters that were hidden initially on the first page, and brings in any questions, but only those questions that help differentiate this group, and leaving behind or remaining hidden characters that were created but are irrelevant to separating out these 4. So by hitting simplify, and you can do this over and over, it's essentially creating a new guide to those 4 genera using the characters stored in the B genera guide in general. So all these in some way, shape, or form help you, I should say, differentiate these 4 groups. Now, the actual choices, like here it's a female one. Well, if it's a male that you're looking at, that's not relevant, but you didn't specify that, nor can you in here. So it's presenting you with possibilities. You then, knowing what you know about the species and what you can see, go through this list, choosing the ones that are relevant to the gender of the specimen you're looking at, and that essentially you like, oh, that's an easy one. I can tell that the axilla is sticking out on that thing. So boom, I'm going to go to that. Now, interestingly, here's a good example. 3 are recorded as having their rear face that way, and 1 as not. So you would think, because we had 4, that it would yield 1 one group. But it also could be the case that some of the original 4 were scored for both and some not scored at all for either of those. Let's see what happens when so we're getting perhaps into nuance here. If I click that one, I have all 4. So my guess, because Calides, I know, does not have this projecting rear, axilla, is probably not scored for either of those. So it remains. So if a species, or in this case, a genus, has not been scored for a character, it stays in the guide, right? Because you have no information that either keeps it in or kicks it out. So in this case, this character is really dealing with 3 of the 4 genera. That was probably too much information, but does that make sense?
The questioner,
The questioner says it was a very helpful explanation.
Okay, good.
We are out of time, but I wanted to respond to an email that I received during class. And I wasn't listening when you said it, talking about parasitic bumblebees, and they are hairy bees. They just don't have the corbicula. Is that is true, right?
Well, so corbicula is basically hairs surrounding a bare area. So some pollen carrying bees, Melisodes is just comes to mind, but many, Hylaeus, have no corbicula. They just have what amounts to a big brush of hairs that carry the pollen. So there might be possibly there's 2 things going on in that statement.
All right, any other questions, hand raising situations? Not seeing any. I would love if the people who were not able to view the chat today or were having trouble showing any kind of response, we are going to have a conversation about parasitic bees. If you guys could check some of your device settings, if perhaps, like, I don't see anything immediately on my side that disables the chat for you. So I would like you to do some troubleshooting and see if there's anything on your end that might have done that. And I would love if you would send me an email telling me how you were logged in, if you were logged in from the desktop app, from the browser, or your phone, or if you have not joined the Microsoft team itself. I think those are some questions that I would like to ask while I try to troubleshoot this situation.
Did all guests have this problem?
No.
Okay. So it's not being a guest, it's that some guests.
Yes.
Okay.
So guests could provide that input in email form.
The guests who had a problem.
Guests who had a problem, and also maybe the guests who did not have a problem, so they can tell me
Okay.
what they were doing. And I just saw a hand raised that then went down. I think their name was Erica. Are you still here?
I was just going to say real quick, I think it's the non-chat options. I don't think it's a setting per se. I think it is just if you haven't signed up for the Microsoft Teams and you're using the browser function. Because I know I lost the chat function and I haven't done anything different. And it said when I logged in that the chat's only available for the Microsoft Teams. So I think whoever was doing the browser version probably had the same problem.
So you have to be a Teams member or using the Teams software somehow. Is that
right?
Okay.
In that case, I might change our classroom one final time.
Okay.
So it's not associated with only the team, and I can still do uploads of the recordings, just like we were doing before.
Mm-hmm.
It just won't be, these particular meetings won't be automatically cataloged. I will have to do it manually. Okay. But I don't see any problem with that. Thank you for that feedback. I'm gonna look into that deeper, and that's great information.
Everyone should know that Erica, many years ago, maybe not many, but was in our lab as a intern volunteer.
Yay. Okay, I think okay, there's no other things in the chat that are relevant to class that needs to be recorded right now. I can chat them later.
Can I also mention that Erica did a lot of the Bumblebee guide, now that I'm thinking of it. Thank you, Erica.
Anytime.
All right, friends. Well, we will see you next time using Serotina.
Okay.
Have a good week.